This morning we continue our summer series, Refresh, Renew, Restore. We turn to the Gospel according to Mark in the New Testament and find the last in a series of Jesus' healings before entering Jerusalem. As we read from Mark 10, verses 46 through 52, listen for the question Jesus asks Bartimaeus. May our hearts be open to what the Spirit has in store for us through the reading of our text. They came to Jericho, and as he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he cried out even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. Holy words for God's people.
Thank you. Friends, this morning we get the joy of having Reverend Cara Scriven with us this morning. She'll be bringing the word. Reverend Cara is the district superintendent of the Tacoma district, which I found out this morning is south of us. It's good things to know in life. She has an awesome word that she's been preparing for us here. I pray that we would open our hearts and our minds to hear what she has to say, what God has been preparing in her. She is the mother of three. She's most recently served at Redmond United Methodist Church, which is a lot closer than Tacoma. And if you would just join me in welcoming Reverend Cara Scriven as she brings us the word.
Good morning. I want to begin this morning by telling you a story. I've recently read the story. It's anonymous, or the author's unknown. I couldn't find it on Google, so I don't know exactly where it came from, but it's an old story. And it begins with one of the most famous opening lines of any story. Can anyone guess what that might be? That's right. Good job. Once upon a time. So once upon a time in an ancient kingdom, there lived a master. And the master loved to go walking in his garden in the cool of the night. And in the midst of the garden, there lived the most beloved, the most beautiful plant, the bamboo. And the bamboo would dance and play whenever the wind came to revel in the garden. It would toss and sway, it would leap and bow, and this delighted the master's heart. One day, the master came to look upon the bamboo with eyes of curious expectancy. And the master said to the bamboo, "You know, bamboo, I think I could use you." And the bamboo leapt up, threw his head back. He was so delighted, for finally he would know why he was made. He would know all that he was growing towards. His destiny would finally be revealed. And the bamboo said, "Master, I am ready. Use me as you wish." And the master said, "Bamboo, I'd have to cut you down." And the bamboo shook in terror and said, "Cut me down? The most beloved plant in all of the garden. You would cut me down? No, no way. You use me for joy, use me for glory, but do not cut me down." This response by the bamboo reminds me of a story earlier in Mark. Jesus has just told his disciples that he was going to go to Jerusalem. He was going to be tortured, he'd be killed, and he'd rise again. And Peter responds by saying, "No way, that ain't happening. It's going to be fine. Everything's going to be okay. You're going to come into power. Don't you worry." And Jesus says to Peter, the one whom is the rock on whom the church is built, that Peter, right? Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." But we're kind of like Peter and the bamboo, right? We don't want to experience or even to see suffering. Anything but that, we say. Anything. We're often a little bit like James and John, which just a few verses before our text today come to Jesus and say, "Jesus, we want you to do whatever we ask of you." And Jesus says, "Well, what do you want me to do for you?" And they say, "We want to sit on your left hand and your right hand when you come into your glory." Now, we don't exactly ask that of God or of Jesus, do we? But we ask similar questions. Actually, it's a little more of a demand. God, get me that job or that promotion. God, keep my family and friends from that flood or earthquake or hurricane or whatever is the latest national disaster. God, make sure that all of my family never gets sick with anything really big. Jesus responds to the disciples by saying, "Can you drink from the cup I'm drinking from?" And the disciples say, "Oh yeah, we can do it, no worries." But the cup that Jesus is talking about is not a cup of joy, it's a cup of suffering. You see, the disciples, they want glory, they want transformation, and they want it without any kind of struggle, without any kind of sorrow. And the bamboo is like that too. But the master says to the bamboo, "I'm sorry, if I don't cut you down, I can't use you." Well, the garden grew still, and the wind held its breath, and you could hear the pause of the bamboo. And finally, he bows his head and he says, "If that is the only way, Master, use me as you wish." "Oh, but bamboo, if I use you, I am going to have to take your branches and your leaves from you as well." "Oh, spare me, Master. Must you cut me down and lay my beauty in the dust? And must you also take my leaves and branches as well?" And the master said, "If I do not, I cannot use you." Well, the sun hit her face, and this butterfly floating by fearfully floated away, and then you could hear the bamboo take a breath in that moment. And he whispered, "Okay, take my leaves and branches as well." Bamboo, if I am to use you, I am going to have to split you open and cut out your heart. bamboo took a breath, bowed his head, and said, "Master, use me as you wish." The blind man in our text today doesn't need any convincing to give of himself like the master has to convince the bamboo. In fact, in our story, it is the disciples who are trying to keep the blind man away from Jesus. Keep out the pain, keep out the sorrow, keep out the broken. But there is something about the blind man. He knows he can see something about Jesus that the disciples cannot. He knows that Jesus is the Son of David. And so when Jesus calls him and asks him the same question he asked of James and John, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man doesn't ask for glory. He doesn't ask for transformation, doesn't ask for success or happiness. He simply asks to have his sight restored. And then he doesn't go running off to see his family whom he hasn't seen in who knows how long. He doesn't go running off to evangelize everyone about how great Jesus is. No, the blind man follows Jesus into Jerusalem. The blind man goes from the brokenness of poverty and blindness to following Jesus to his own death and brokenness. This is the gospel, my friends. This is the gospel. It's about being broken. It's about being weak. It's about struggle and sorrow. It is not about success. It is not about our 3-car garages and our 2.5 kids or our house by the lake or, I don't know, all of my friends are going to Fiji. Why can't I go there too? It's not about that. It's about being broken. That's the way of Jesus. The bamboo follows this way of brokenness as well. The master takes him, cuts him down, peels off his leaves, cuts off his branches, splits him open, cuts out his heart, and then the master gently lifts him and carries him to his dry field, where he puts one end of the bamboo in the spring and the other end in the dry field. And the spring sang a song of welcome to the bamboo and ran down the hollowed insides and into the dry field. The master planted rice, and the harvest came. And on that day when the harvest arrived, the bamboo was even more glorious than he was standing in the garden. Because once a symbol of abundant life in the middle of the garden, now in his brokenness and humility, he is channeling abundant life in his master's world. You know, the bamboo and Jesus have a lot in common. Jesus was equally beautiful in his life. Amazing. And just think about it. Think about the way he talked to the powers that be, the way he stood up for people, the way he always constantly widened the circle for women and the outcast, the stories he told that still have power for us today. He was amazing. And yet, in the brokenness of the cross and the transformation of the resurrection, he became even more glorious. In fact, he had transformed so much through his pain that his disciples didn't even recognize him. He had to call one of their names before she recognized him. There had to be literally a breaking of the bread before the scales fell from his disciples' eyes and they saw Jesus now as the Christ. You know, our brokenness transforms us as well. For some of us, it is in our own brokenness that we become advocates for other people. It is sometimes in our own brokenness, the literally tearing open of our hearts, that our true selves emerge from their protective walls. And sometimes it is in our brokenness that we are able to listen deeply to other people's pain and love the unlovable. And in those moments, we become more glorious. But that's why the Christian faith is centered around brokenness. Because it teaches us that the world doesn't revolve around what we want. There's a Buddhist monk, Thich Nhat Hanh, who said that it is through suffering that we learn understanding and compassion. There's a geophysicist and a devout Catholic who says, his name is Xavier Lepchant, and he says that it is through our brokenness that we learn to have empathy for other people. It is in these moments of brokenness, when it's so dark that we cannot see, when we don't know where to turn next, when we can't get out of bed, when we feel like we can't make ends meet, when things are so complicated and chaotic we don't know what to do next, when the same nightmare plays over and over and over again, whether in real life or in our heads. It's in that brokenness that we see the other person. And as United Methodists, it is out of that brokenness that causes us to go out into the streets. It causes us to act. So when black men and women are struggling for their lives, we go and join them. It's when there's no food in our cities, fresh food for people to eat, that we seek to change the world. And it is why we advocate for those with mental illness. Because we know how it feels. We know the struggle. And this is the way. It's the way that Jesus followed. It's the way of discipleship. It is the journey. But you know, in the 21st century, it feels like we have forgotten this. It feels like we are meant to be strong and capable and independent, even in church. It's like we're trying to avoid anything that has to do with being broken, trying to keep it away. And that's really hard to do, but we manage it. And yet when we open the newspaper or we walk out the door, front door, there it is again. The world is broken. And gun violence alone in places that we thought were safe, schools, homes, movie theaters. There are refugees who have gathered all that they had and left their country only to find nations who won't even take them. And then we have young people and people who feel so different that they feel so much pain that the only way that they can end that, they believe, is to commit suicide. The world is broken. There's no doubt. And I hate to be the one to tell you this, but there is no political candidate who's going to fix it for us. Democrat, Republican, liberal, socialist, it doesn't matter. This problem is so big, there is no quick fix. There's no wall big enough to keep out the bad people, whomever the bad people are. There's no legislation that's going to end all of the gun violence, and there's no education that we can give one another that's going to keep misconceptions that we have of people who are simply different than us. It just isn't going to happen. And it isn't going to happen because the world is broken, because we are messed up and broken. And we have spent far too long believing that we had all the right answers. Far too long picking the splinters out of everybody else's eyes, and we've got a log in our own. You know, if we really want to change the world, if we really want to make it better, then we're going to have to start with ourselves. And we're going to have to acknowledge that we are broken, and we have failed, and we don't have all the answers. And I know that this is absolutely counterintuitive. I know it makes no sense. I mean, how do we acknowledge our brokenness to change the world? But it is. It's what Jesus has said all along. It's what all the saints have said and remind us. It's what our scriptures tell us, that in our brokenness, we are transformed. That we might stand with as great symbols of the abundant life. But in our brokenness and our humility, God's Spirit can flow right through us. And we can bring what our Master only dreams of into reality. That's the gospel. And I pray that you and I would have the courage and the strength to choose this much less traveled road. Amen.